ladies and gentlemen, the next car that's coming up is yet another important car in Bentley history. This is the car that won the Concourse Of Elegance at St James Palace in 2013. This is not only the 1930 Bentley stunning This is the car that was reputed to be the car that won the Blue Train race. So when the owner of the car and chairman of Bentley Motors, Captain Wolf Bonato, was heading down to the south of France to have a weekend there with some friends with his Speed 6. Conversation turned to the fact that various people had wagered they could beat the Le Train Bleu, the Blue Train from Cannes to Calais, and Bonato, ever the sporting chap, decided that was far too easy. He could not only beat the car to Calais, he could be back in London before the train reached its destination in northern France. And this is the car he had at the time, or so we believe. He set off from Cannes very early in the morning. He'd arranged fuel stops on the way to make sure he had enough fuel. Despite losing the fuel truck somewhere in Lyon, he managed to refuel. Had a puncture near Paris, changed the wheel, got to the cross-channel ferry, and having checked in at the RAC, the Royal Automobile Club in London, to establish his time was 4 minutes before the train got into the station. He was then still in the Conservative Club for a celebratory drink before the train arrived. Now, you were going to ask about the problem we had with the bet, I think.
Well, was it not on the way he received so many fines that actually the bet wasn't worth having because they stacked up more than the money that he actually won?
That's right, he did, but then I don't think he was sure of a dollar too. But the other thing was that the French authorities were so miffed about this that they denied Bentley the opportunity to display at the next Paris salon.
Well, I think they didn't suffer for that because, I mean, the reputation of the Bentley boys for their daring do and those exploits, it was all about having fun. They were often ex-fighter pilots, their spirit of adventure through their veins. And tell me just one thing, Richard, I mean, this is, for me, one of my favourite all-time Bentleys. I love the fastback styling, but Wolf Bonato, of course, was Bentley chairman, and he designed this shape himself. He apparently penned it on the back of an envelope.
Yeah, that's the story, and there's a lot of design cues on this which you should note. And anybody who's been to Le Mans, the 24-hour race, or seen it on television, you'll see one of the features of the Le Mans race is when you have the French firemen on standby in the pit lane, ready to defend the spot with the cars. And the way they're traditional and ceremonial polished aluminium helmets, and the tail of the helmet has a little curve up over the neck, and that is exactly what you see on the back of the wings of this car. That's the inspiration for the design of the Gurney Nutting wings.
It's a spectacular.
Another thing I would say about this, don't go yet, is you can see this fastback slopes away fast, so there's no room for headroom in the back for normal seats. So there's one side saddle seat in the back. So you've got two front seats and a side saddle seat in the back. And when Wolf Bonato used to go out of an evening with the latest future Mrs. Bonato, the chauffeur would sit in the back quietly pretending he wasn't there and he would drive. Now there's a great story around the race, and this car is famous in the Terence Cuneo painting of the car and the train, and of course the little mouse running in front, and always was felt to be the car that won. But when the body records were unearthed, many years after they were felt to be lost, it was found that this car was actually completed in May 1930, and we know the race took part in March 1930. So then there was a race to find out which car Bonato had actually used, and the owner of this car set people out to find it. They found that he had a Speed 6 monomer-bodied four-door saloon, and in the intervening years the body had been taken off the original chassis, put on another chassis and replaced with another body. So he found both of those cars, bought the pair of them and reunited the original body with the original chassis. So when we did a rerun of the run 75 years after the day, we took both the cars and drove in 2 days from Cannes to Calais. We stayed in the same hotel as Wolf Bonato. We had drinks in his room. We drank a Bonato cocktail in Bonato's room and drove Bonato's cars back to London. We got into London on the Friday night. We went to Morton's in Berkeley Square, and we had a dinner to celebrate with Diana Bonato Walker, Wolf Bonato's daughter. And she said, looking at the cars, how proud her father would be that 75 years to the day after the original race, that his car had done it again without missing a beat. And the owner and I said to her at the same time, which car was it? She said, oh, well, she's convinced it was this car. So as far as I'm concerned, we'll never know. And the owner and I love the fact that this is an enigma that will never be resolved. There's no photographic evidence. So I'm assuming this here.
My money's on this too. This looks to me like a piece of train, even with you driving.
It's such a charm. One try with me, you're doubting my ability. But anyway, Evan, thank you for bringing
It's
the car.
so majestic.
Great car.
I mean, just imagine this car driving around Grosvenor Square and with the lights on at night. It must make such an impact. Thank you, Evan.
There are some great racing sporting Bentleys. Here's the beauty as well. There's a 1956 Bentley S1 Drophead Coupe, coachwork by in-house coach builder H.J. Mulliner. And this was specially ordered by a discerning Derbyshire gentleman, Mr. A.J.N. Bars of Repton Park. And the Bentley S1 was just the sort of fine motor car that any captain of great British industry would have aspired to only in the mid-1950s. Of course, following on from the very successful and evocative R-Type Continental that was in production from 1952 to 1955, when the S-Series came out and later model Bentleys, there was the Continental version and the various convertible versions. So S1, S2, S3, and this S1 is only one of a dozen built by with this rare aluminium coachwork by Mulliner. Exceptionally clean styling, as you can see, and very understated with sophisticated shell grey coachwork with a light grey interior. And this has the very smooth, silky smooth, straight six-cylinder engine. It was the last model to use that particular engine before it was replaced by the V8 in the S2 in 1958-59. But a very supple motor, as you can just hear. It's like ticking out like a sewing machine.
Just hear you.
I think that's a hint, isn't it? Anyway, we'll keep going. S1s have really gained in desirability in recent years, and this is a particularly special car to have with us, so we're delighted you could bring it.
I mean, it's so elegant. The colour combination with this dark wood marker, it's absolutely delightful. And these were super high-end, luxurious motor cars that cost more than most houses during the early 60s and late 50s, I would suggest.
Yeah, but highly desirable and wonderful specification. Thank you for bringing it.
Thank you. Richard, tell us a bit of history about Bentley. So Bentley were bought by Rolls-Royce following the Depression, and then you mentioned Derby. So the Derby Cricklewood era.
The Cricklewood era was the original Bentley factory. When Bentley went past the Rolls-Royce to stop the alliance with Napier, which they saw as a threat. So car production then moved to the Rolls-Royce factory in Derby, where a lot of fantastic Bentleys were built with some wonderful coachwork. Then before production moved to Crewe post-war, where it remains today. But we're heading back in time now. This is another hugely important motor car.
This looks like a locomotive. This looks almost like a mallard or something.
Yes, it does. It's got the nose of the mallard, doesn't it? But no, there was one of the Bentley boys, Tim Birkin, one of the great Bentley racers, and we'll come back to the Bentley boys in a minute, but he was racing his 4.5 litre Bentley in Germany and came up against the compressor Mercedes, the supercharged Mercedes, driven by Caracciolo and Werner, and it beat him easily. And so he came back to W.O. Bentley and said, surely we have to do the same thing. We have to put a supercharger on the 4.5 litre to compete. W.O. Bentley wouldn't have it. He said it would corrupt the design of the engine. He said if you just want more power, just add more.
Just makes it bigger, yeah.
Yes. And he was proved right in the long run. The blower has become probably the most evocative of all vintage Bentleys, but it never won a race. It got a few speed records, we'll come to that in a second, but it never won a race. The next car we'll see was the...
But they had to build 50, he had to convince WO to build 50 of them to allow them to enter into Le Mans, which was effectively for production cars with 4-seat bodies on them.
Yeah, but they actually built the race cars first. They did it, the wrong way around. So they built the 4 race cars in the spare. This is the #1 race car. It was never intended to race at Le Mans. It originally had a 2-seat body. It was always intended for speed record racing at Brooklands, and then had this single-seat body put on it after the original body caught fire. But Birkin got the outer circuit speed record at Brooklands of 137 miles an hour with this car, which meant that he was down the straights to get that average. He was doing over 150 miles an hour in this car, which is astonishing when you can see the open cockpit there, and all he had was his traditional white leather helmet and his Birkin polka dot scarf flowing behind him.
Well, it's important to add as well that we talk a lot about Le Mans, and that really was the race to win. Well, it still is today. It was the ultimate test of the motor car, but I think Brooklands as well deserves a bit more of a mention, because if you've not visited Brooklands, you can still walk up the bank in, It is steep. It is incredibly steep, probably from here up to the top of this display, and it's very difficult to walk up it. So imagine driving around there at 80 miles an hour, never mind 100. And you used to get a badge, I believe. You got 100 mile an hour at Brooklands or 120 mile an hour at Brooklands, which many people wore proudly on their radiators.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it was an incredibly dangerous thing to do. There's great photographs of this car, completely airborne. There was a bump on the members' banking, which was well known, and this car at over 130 miles an hour is in the air, all four wheels off the ground. So it's a phenomenally brave thing to do, to drive like that. And as you say, very steep banking, and in fact it relates to the history of the next car as well, which we'll mention. But thank you, Dan, for driving this up. This is the very famous, very important #1 Birkin blower, the outer circuit record car from Brooklands 1932.
I'd like to mention as well, Richard, one of the former owners of this car not very long ago, sadly now passed away, Mr. George Daniels. We've talked earlier to Wilhelm Schmidt from Langenzoner about people's love of fine mechanical instruments, whether they're to be worn on the wrist or to be driven around Brooklands. And George Daniels, of course, made extremely fine, low volume watches, a British chronologer, and he was very well known, and that was his car for many years indeed. So he was a great lover of Bentley.
Yeah, that's right. He was a great Bentley fisherman. He had that car and the #3 blower as well, YU3250. So he had two of the four cars.
And that when he passed away was sold at auction, becoming the most expensive British car sold at that point, I think.
That's right. Still is, I think. Now, ladies and gentlemen, another very important
You've
car.
got a lot of cars, Evan.
He's a popular chap, Evan. Yeah. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a car known as Old #1. With its different body shell on it, it won Le Mans twice, in 1929 1930. It was the prototype Speed 6 that went with Wolf Bonato driving. He won the second of his 3 victories in succession at Le Mans with this car, and it carried then #1 on the radiator, so it became known as Old #1. Wonderful Speed 6 with Tim Birkin co-piloting at that time. It went back in 1930, in 1929 I should say, that it won with 3 4.5 litres behind it. So Bentley did a whitewash then, took first, second, third and fourth. Now they were slightly concerned that nobody would come back the next year because they felt that Bentley would be so overwhelming, but they did, and the compressor Mercedes came back, as we talked about a minute ago, to race in 1930. So a strong Bentley team was put in, and the car we have just next to us here, the Birkin blower, was being driven by Tim Birkin, and that was the hare. This is the car that went off flat out from the start. They knew that Caracciolo and Werner and the compressor Mercedes would want to give chase, and it had the desired effect. The compressor blew the car up, and the car retired during the night. That car went on to still complete 20 hours of the 24, but then it retired with a bent valve itself, leaving this car to go on to win with Old #2 coming second. So they came first and second in that 1930 race.
I think it's important to mention as well, Richard, just we talk about not with this body on it, that car had a different body, and just to say that when these cars were built in period, the chassis was very separate with the engine. They have wooden floorboards. Effectively, you can drive them without the body. The body is not part of the construction. So this car, as you say, started out with a 4-seat bodywork, which were the regulations to race at Le Mans, but this is as it last raced at Brooklands, hence why it's presented this way. But twice Le Mans winner, that's quite a feat in the 1920s.
It's so important for that, yeah. So 2 times Le Mans winner. Bonato kept the car. He used it as a touring car, but then he decided to compete with it at Brooklands. He actually used other drivers to drive for him at Brooklands, but he had it put into this 2-seat body. He developed the car. We were talking earlier about how race cars developed, as you just said. So he put an increased gauge chassis from the 8-litre in this. He put an 8-litre engine in it. And the fuel tank on the back of this, as Evan knows, there's a huge fuel tank here. This could do the 500-mile race on one tank. So imagine the weight of fuel that was behind it. That's why it's got these complex hydraulic shock absorbers on the back. But this is the condition it was in when it last raced in 1932. Sadly, it was not a happy end. Poor old Clive Dunphy went too high up the banking, caught his wheel over the edge. The car went over the top. The car was wrecked, and so was Clive, sadly. A long story there, you know the story, Evan, but poor old Clive used to race. He got married to a lovely young actress who made him promise never to race again. He said one last race, and his brother Jack was there to watch him go over the top. But the car was recovered, it was rebuilt in much the form that you see it now, but the current owner has made sure that it's exactly now as you see it, as it was when it raced its last race in 1932. A very important car, 2 times Le Mans winner, Brooklyn's racer, Wolf Bonato's, one of Wolf Bonato's cars. Last thing I'd add, just a little postscript. When Diana Bonato Walker died, we talked about her, talking about the Blue Train car. The owner contacted me. He'd had a great relationship with Diana, corresponding. He asked me to take this car down to her memorial, funeral memorial service at her home, which I did.
Well, I think, Richard, your knowledge of Bentley has accrued over 40 years of service to the company is outstanding. So, and we also have Richard to thank for this fine display of Bentleys celebrating the centenary. Thank you, Richard. I mean, we really don't realise how privileged we are to have this lineup of Bentleys here. Twice Le Mans winner, completely original team blower, and many others, including the Blue Train car that we've just seen. So, thank you, Evan. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Evan.
I'm not pushing it, it looks too heavy.
Well, here's another gorgeous car to come up as part of this celebration. This is a very late Speed 6 dual power sports tour Bentley car. Very unusual body configurations, you can see. And it's great to see that some of these cars have maintained their entirely original specification. A lot of cars were changed over the years to have Le Mans replica bodies, especially the big Speed 6s. So this Speed 6, you can see with this very original Van den Pla dual cowl tourer body. You can see why it's got the dual cowl, so passengers will sit in the back of the car. The canopy that the windscreen is fixed to lifts up to allow you to get in and out of the car, which provides this wonderful touring configuration. The Speed 6 launched in 1928, as we heard, the 29 prototype race at Le Mans, and this car is one of only 6 built with this bodywork. And Major Sir Egbert Bertie Cadbury, none other, DSC, DFC, DSC, JP, DL, lots of medals, was the first owner. And you might recognise the name, Peter, because he was the grandson of the chocolate company founder, John Cadbury.
Do I look like I eat lots of chocolate? Is that what you're trying to say?
You certainly do. Even though Speed 6s won Le Mans in 2930, buyers proved hard to find. The Speed 6 Bertie bought had actually been built in 1929, but because of the stock market crash that year, remained unsold for over 2 years.
Well, tell me, just one question I have, Richard. Tell me a little bit about this fabric covering the body. It's called Rexine, I believe, and I understand that the original machine that produced this was discovered, restored, and is now recreating this finish that was unique, I think, to Bentley's.
Well, it wasn't unique to Bentley's, but it was that period. But you're right, Rexine was like a cotton fabric that could be a bit like a wax jacket. It could be waterproofed, and it could be painted. And as you can see with this car, the beauty of it was that you can have exactly the same texture on the metalwork and on the bodywork, and exactly the same paint colour as well. When the Rexine machines suddenly stopped being used, cars were rebodied when they had to be rebodied using vinyl. And you'll still see many old cars, not just Bentleys, with fabric bodies with vinyl on them. The thing is with vinyl, of course, it's a dyed colour, not painted, so it kind of doesn't match the texture or the colour. But as you say, a machine was found in an old mill in Leicestershire, which a very well-known Bentley collector heard about. They bought the machine, they took it to Graham Moss, a great Bentley restorer in Bedfordshire, rebuilt the machine, found a chap who used to work on the machine, who was in his 80s, who came to show them how to use it. So now Rexine can again be applied to bodies, and that's why you have this wonderful finish. Different textures, you can choose different textures, but you can see you have matching paintwork.
And I think with this car, even though it is a tourer rather than an out-and-out sports car, if you were the passenger jumping in here and this screen popped up, you feel like you're going to be driven quite quickly, don't you?
Oh, I think yes. It's no sluggard. You know, this is a big, 6.5 litre straight 6 engine. It's interesting that, like so many vehicles, this Bentley disappeared during World War II, emerging in 1946. But luckily still with all the original coachwork. And it was cherished by various notable collectors, including the Scot Willie Dale, who lent the car to star in the period BBC TV drama Lord Peter Wimsey as the aristocratic sleuth's own car. So it's got on-screen fame as well. So it's a great car to have
car
here.
With noble origins, and it's absolutely majestic today. Thank you so much for bringing it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Now for something quite different, another tribute to Bentley's endeavours at Le Mans, and of course Bentley did go on to win Le Mans again.
Yeah, Bentley won 5 times in the early 20s in 1930, and then went back to 70 and then went to Speed 8, and so won, as you say, for the 6th time in 2003, came first and second again after like the 1930 win. This being the centenary, Bentley have set out to celebrate it in various ways, and one of the ways they've done it is to bring out a couple of limited editions, and this is one of them. This is the Bentley Continental GT number 9 edition, built by the in-house coach builder Mulliner. Delighted that Mr. and Mrs. Ronald Parry can bring the car to show us today. And this is actually the Geneva show car. This was the car used to announce the arrival of this very special limited edition in the 100th year. 100 cars are being built, only 20 for the UK. And you'll like to know there's a link back to Birkin's blower that raced in 1930. It's that very car there. We found that the piece of wood under the seat, I got too many screw holes in it, it was a bit rotten, so we changed some of the seat structure on that car, which you can't actually see, but we kept the piece of wood, and that piece of wood was sliced into 100 parts, and one of them is in this car, and there's 99 other bits of wood in the other 99 cars. So there's a link between that car there and this. There's a little bit of wood that raced on them all that's now in this motor car. And you always touch wood, Ronnie, don't you, when you drive it? But this is a great car, sleek two-door bodywork with this 626 horsepower drivetrain, W12 engine, four-wheel drive. And you can see these lovely big 21-inch wheels on it. And you've noticed when the car drove up the mesh grille featuring the painted number 9 graphic, which it shares with the car that's parked just over there. It's got an original style Jaeger clock inspired by the 1930s styles, and the organ stops on the air conditioning controls are gold plated, as they were or brass in the original cars, but now gold plated in this. So this is a great tribute to 100 years of Bentley, a great tribute to Tim Birkin. So Ronnie, thank you very much for bringing the car up with us today. So that brings the whole legend up to date.
We talked earlier to Ian Callum about stance, and I think with those 21-inch wheels, it really does sit well, that car. I think that's a very, very good looking modern Bentley indeed.
Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Now, very shortly, we've got another exciting car coming onto the stage, so don't go too far away. But thank you to all the Bentley drivers for bringing those wonderful Bentleys up to help celebrate the centenary of Bentley Motors.